Welcome to Verastahl, a YouTube channel devoted to my horror stories. I'm Brandon Faircloth, and if you enjoy the story that you're about to hear, please like, share, and subscribe. And also hit the notification bell if you get a chance to get notified when the next videos go up. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to mention that my newest book, Sack of Knives, is already out in stores, and it, as well as all of my other books, can be found at links in the descriptions below. Additionally, for those of you that this may be your first video, bear in mind this is part 7 and part 8 of an ongoing series, and so you may very well want to go back and listen to the earlier parts before you reach this part. As for tonight's story, it's called We Made Up a Ghost, and Now It's Killing Us, Part 7. "What do you mean you're very hungry?" Ellis asked. His tone was light, but his face was serious and looked concerned. "Are you talking about eating people?" Another laugh, though this one sounded a bit more like someone sawing through sheet metal. I tried to repress a shiver and fight the urge to scream at it to leave you alone. That was the worst part of it that first time. Seeing you not being you. The unnatural way the professor controlled you made you look like a life-size puppet or corpse. Either way, it took everything I had to keep talking to it, which is funny considering how often we talked to it after that. Part of it was because it was the first time, of course, and we grew more accustomed to the strangeness the more it happened. Part of it was because it was you. And I always had the same unease when it decided it was your turn. No, nothing like that. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, really. Unless they bother any of you, of course. It paused a moment and then went on. But I need people to know I exist. To have stronger belief in me from more sources. Signs that the ghost is around. That kind of thing. There's nothing you need to do. I'm strong enough now to take care of it. But I wanted to let you know I was back, and I hope you do talk to me again. Your ritual is very clever and works well enough. And I've missed you. I tried to smile. We've missed you too, Professor. And it was true. Despite our fear and worry at what we were dealing with, we were already used to the idea of the Professor being our friend and protector. The thing that made us special. So whatever our misgivings at the time, they took a back seat to our happiness and relief that it was back. Over the summer, we talked to the Professor every few days, never for too long, and it said that it took energy for it to sit on one of us, and it needed to conserve what it had. But it always seemed happy to come when we did our homemade ritual, and it was glad to answer questions for us when we asked. At first, we had more questions about what it was or what its end goals were, but we always got variations on the same pleasant reassurances. They were palatable enough and hard to refute, even if we had no real way of knowing if it was being honest or not. Then we started to ask more questions about what it knew. Things about the void and the other realms, about mysteries in our own world. We learned about a lot of things, even if we didn't understand all of them very well. But there were gaps in its knowledge too, and I think it was being honest about them, because it enjoyed telling us things we didn't know. For instance, it said that there was little it could tell us about the void because of the realm's nature. It defied easy description or understanding. But it told us several stories about the Incarnata, which it seemed to know, or at least enjoy, the best. All it could tell us of hell was that it existed and was vastly different now than it had been at one point, due to some large battle that had taken place there. As for the place it called the Nightlands, it was more reluctant, just describing it as one of the larger realms, full of power and potential. There is a thing there called the Baron that, well, he's very ambitious. We had little context for any of that other than hell, of course, which it knew little about, so we focused on things closer to home. Bigfoot? It was sitting on Thomas's chest this time and gave a small grin. It had gotten better at mimicking natural facial expressions, which somehow made it more and less creepy when it tried. No, not in this reality. There are 2 species of ape and 1 marsupial that have not been identified yet and are sometimes mistaken for a Bigfoot, however. There's also a genetically modified version of an alpaca that has been the basis of Yeti legends for several hundred years. Weird. Ghosts? Aside from me? No, only joking. Yes, there are several kinds of spiritual entities that would fall under what you would call ghosts. Vampires? Thomas's face lit up slightly. Oh yes. There are a variety of those, though none that actually fit the most common archetype popularized by Bram Stoker. It surveyed us, its eyes twitching slightly as it moved from face to face. Have any of you read Dracula, children? It really is excellent. We learned that while it had vast stores of knowledge from some unknown means, the professor still loved to learn new things and had a method by which it could draw information from books and computers without having to physically read or interact with them. Back when we had first started telling Professor stories around school, it had fed on the school library and the textbooks in hundreds of lockers throughout the building. Toward the end, we found out it had started exploring the internet, which raised its own concerns. But during that last summer, we were just having fun. And despite the vast wealth of knowledge we had at our fingertips, we oddly only had a few sessions towards the beginning where we asked the professor a lot of probing questions about things only it would know. Pretty soon we were just talking, telling it about what we had going on in our lives, even though there was an unspoken understanding it already knew most of what we were doing, while it asked us questions and told us stories. It really was great at telling stories. I think it's like if you became friends with someone from another part of the world. At first you might be quizzing each other about your respective lands, but if you are truly friends, that phase passes as you move from differences between you to things you have in common. Shared experiences replace novelty. Strangeness and excitement give way to familiarity and love. And we did love the professor. I think in its way, it loved us too. The problem is we started treating it like it was a person instead of whatever it really was. Like Ellis might have said, the problem with being friends with a tiger isn't just that you start thinking like a tiger. It's that you assume the tiger is starting to think like you. But a tiger has tiger thoughts and loves as a tiger loves. Soon enough, we started finding out what that meant. Over the summer months, we had heard tales of weird happenings around the town. The Brigham Well, You know, that stupid thing in the middle of the town square? It froze over in the middle of July. 5 different households woke up to find the furniture in their homes all swapped to different rooms, including the beds they were in. The bases at the rec department softball field all burst into flames simultaneously, while over a dozen people were there to witness it after a practice session. People did talk about it, and some of them did attribute it to the professor, but a lot of them just chalked it up to freak weather, an eccentric burglar, and trapped underground gases. Even if none of that made any real sense or had any proof behind it, it was easier for people to handle mundane excuses than extraordinary truth. I think that frustrated the professor, and I like to think it really did try to collect more belief without hurting anyone else. But it was learning its own lessons from each experiment, and it saw time and people's aptitude for self-deception inoculating the town against belief in the professor. But it is very smart. It knew that there was no real inoculation against fear, or pain, or death. I had been getting bugged by Timothy Egan to go out with him since the first day of sophomore year. He was a jock, but a smart one, and he decided that he wanted to date one of the strange girls of the Stonebrook Six. He actually started out hitting on both me and Cassidy, but between the blank, uninterested stare she gave him and Thomas's threatening glower, he had quickly settled all his efforts on me. 2 weeks in, I finally gave in. He was cute, and I thought, even though I wasn't really interested in him, I'd never been on a date before, so it might be fun. And it actually was. He was polite, took me to a nice place, and was never aggressive or weird like I'd been afraid he might be. I knew you didn't like it, which is part of why I went out with him at all, if I'm telling the whole truth. I decided 1 or 2 more dates with him might be enough to get you to talk to me about things if you felt the same way I did. But I'm getting sidetracked and we've got other fish to fry. The first fish actually came up while I was still going out with Tim. You and Ellis were in Mr. Jameson's English class together, and the guy decided early on that he hated you for some reason. He'd say sarcastic things in class, mark you down on tests more harshly when he could get away with it. Ellis wasn't harassed like that, and no one else in your class, or my class with him, was either. Whatever his problem, it came to a head in early October when he accused you of plagiarism. It was the first big grade of the class, and all of his classes had the same project, an essay on one of William Blake's poems. You probably don't remember this, but me and you actually worked on ours together, with us both reading over each other's work several times to make sure it was good enough, particularly with Jameson looking for any reason he could find to give you a low grade. When you got back with an F and a note that it had clearly been plagiarized, you were understandably furious. You told us that you asked him about it after class, and he said he could tell from the writing style that it had been copied from somewhere, though he couldn't offer any more proof, of course, because it was bullshit. He was smirking and telling you that, as the teacher, the grade was entirely his prerogative. That's when you both heard the noise from outside. I think just about the entire school did. Jameson's prized possession was a white 1971 MG. He would come wheeling up to his teacher's parking space that was just outside his room, occasionally honking its peppy little horn at the high school girls he liked the looks of, seemingly oblivious to the rolled eyes and snickers he always received. More than once during class I had seen him glance out the window at the car, as though guarding it from some plot to vandalize it, or maybe just admiring it and daydreaming he was back behind the wheel instead of stuck teaching English to a bunch of 10th graders at Stonebrook High. I wish I had looked up and seen his face when the two of you went to the window to see what all the commotion was. From what you told me, I think you both made it in time for him to see the last of it, but I got to witness the entire thing. I had gotten done with gym class early, which had been sprints around the football field, followed by unimaginative calisthenics. Mrs. Perkins was out with knee surgery, and Coach Anderson didn't care about anything but football, so his main plan was to tire us out and send us away early. I was cutting through the teacher parking lot on my way back to the main building when I heard a screech of metal. It was Jameson's MG, slowly being balled up and crushed like a piece of paper in some invisible giant's hand. Glass shattered and trim popped, but nothing flew off. Everything was self-contained in an ever-constricting sphere of force, a dying star collapsing into itself. Even with everything we had seen and knew, I would have said it was impossible if I hadn't watched it happen. The small car was crushed into a ball less than 3 feet in diameter, and then unceremoniously dropped back to the asphalt with a ringing thud. I knew it was Jameson's car, of course, but I didn't know about your essay yet. No one did. But as I looked around at the handful of other people in the lot and saw the terrified faces pressed against every nearby window, I knew that they understood what it meant just as well as I did. When Jameson started wailing, saying it was somehow your fault, as irrational as that was, well, it wasn't just his car that left the school for good that day. I remember us all getting together after school and talking about it, and none of us, even those of us that saw it, were really scared of what the professor had done, what it was capable of now. We were just happy that it had stood up for you and gotten what it needed. Because the professor was all anyone was talking about now, especially when Ellis slyly let it slip to a couple of people that it had happened while you were talking to Jameson about him trying to fuck you on your essay. We knew that our friend should be well satisfied. It took less than a week for us to realize our mistake. We had underestimated how hungry the professor was, and he had given up on trying to be gentle or doing things for a small audience. So at that Friday's pep rally, with the bleachers packed and everyone watching, the professor murdered Timothy Egan. Part 8. After the destruction of Jameson's car, we should have been scared of what the professor was capable of. Shit, we should have been scared long before that. But we weren't. Thomas and Cassidy were more than a little freaked out when they saw the balled up wreckage of the vehicle being loaded into the back of a dump truck, but even they thought it was pretty great that the professor was looking out for us yet again. As for everyone else at the school, while the professor was being talked about more than ever, the 5 of us actually had fewer people talk to us about it. Now they would usually just get quiet when we approached. In some ways it was isolating, but none of us really cared. I had told Timothy Egan I didn't want to go out with him again that past Sunday, and at the time I thought it had gone pretty well. I could tell that he was starting to really like me, and I didn't feel right about hurting him to make you jealous. Unfortunately, on that same Monday, around the same time that Jameson's car was getting wadded up by the professor, Timothy was leaving the same gym class I had just left. But instead of going on to the main building, he had hung back with several of his friends. I don't know the details, but the rumors and snippets I heard later were that someone had asked him about how far he'd gotten with me. Feeling peer pressure, or maybe because he had hurt feelings, he decided to lie. Talked about how big a slut I was, and how he was done with me now that he'd gotten what he wanted. The words were barely out of his mouth when they heard the yelling from the teacher parking lot and went to see what remained of Jameson's MG. I didn't know about any of that until after everything was over. We went through the rest of the week still riding the buzz of excitement, but unaware that anything else was coming. Then came the Friday afternoon pep rally. Despite being better known for basketball, Tim was a backup receiver on the football team as well, and that Friday, our school was going to be going against the Brockton Mud Dogs, who rarely won against anybody. The pep rally was relaxed and fairly fun, and they'd incorporated a competition of sorts into the rally where all the football players would take turns running up to a small trampoline that had been set up and try to dunk a basketball. It was silly fun, and most of the football players made a big show of hamming it up as they either dunked it or missed terribly. Then Tim's turn came. Smiling as he took the ball from a cheerleader, he started running toward the end of the court. I noticed that he seemed focused and serious by the time he leapt for the trampoline, but maybe he just didn't want to mess up. When he landed on it, instead of propelling him up, it somehow sent him shooting forward as well. His balance caught the bottom edge of the backboard with a sickening crunch, but it did little to slow him. Instead, the blow just caused him to flip over, head over heels, as he continued going toward the center block wall 15 feet beyond the edge of the court. When he hit the wall, he was nearly 20 feet up and struck first with the back of his head. We all heard the immediate cracks as his skull and several other bones gave way before he tumbled to the tile floor like a broken doll. And it all happened so quickly that the cheers were still fading when the screaming started. Even without knowing the reason why, we all knew the professor was behind it. Tim's path and speed were unnatural and far beyond what would have been possible for him just jumping on a small trampoline. We weren't the only ones that thought that, of course, but what could anyone do? It was easier to just pretend it was a terrible accident. School was canceled for the day and for the following week, with grief counselors being called in to talk to students and faculty that wanted to come into the campus on Monday through Wednesday. The candlelight vigil was also to be held that Monday night in the gymnasium. Timothy's death affected us a lot more than any of the rest of the professor's actions had. Even if we had known about his shitty lies at the time, none of us would have thought he deserved to die for it. As it was, we met on Sunday and talked about what to do. We knew there was a chance the professor was listening in on us, but we knew of no other way to stop it, and there did seem to be times where it was unaware of what we were doing. At first, we just sat around talking about how horrible Tim's death had been to watch, and even lamely throwing out suggestions for it being something other than the professor's fault. Ultimately, it was you that came up with an idea. If we made him, we should be able to unmake him, right? We made up a ritual to talk to him, so let's make up one to banish him back to the void. Ellis had looked at you worriedly. Good idea, but we have no idea if it'll work. The professor could have talked to us at any time it felt like it, and it just liked us coming up with a ritual. Maybe it feeds it somehow, or it just thinks it's funny. Either way, if we do that, it'll know what we're trying to do. He swallowed and looked around at the rest of us. It'll be angry about it. It'll turn on us. This led to a long silence. We all had been thinking about that, of course, but Ellis putting words to it made it more real somehow. Finally, Ellis looked back up at you. But we don't have a choice. We have to try and stop it. It can't keep hurting people like this, and we can't keep acting like it's okay. Our plan was to go down into our normal lower level hangout beneath 6th grade hall and do the ritual while the candlelight vigil was going on. The hope was that the professor might be distracted by all those people there, and before it realized what was going on, it would be sent back to where it belonged. Our new ritual was a candlelight vigil of sorts too, though instead of the one candle we used to talk with the professor, we all had lit candles in the circle. We were going to take turns saying, "Professor, we don't believe in you. Return to the void," and blowing out our candle. It sounded lame to us at the time, but we needed to keep it as short and simple as possible, and we had no way of knowing that anything more elaborate would work better. So there we all were, staring into each other's candlelit faces in the dark of an abandoned classroom. Cassidy started us off, saying her words with a slight tremble to her voice and tears rolling down her cheeks. It was hard on her, on all of us. Not just because we were scared, but because even after everything that had happened, it still felt like we were betraying a friend. She puffed out her candle, and we heard a distant alarm start blaring. For a moment I thought it was some sign the ritual had worked, but then I realized that made no sense. I also recognized the sound. It was the building's fire alarm. We went back upstairs into pandemonium. There had been nearly 2,000 people in the gymnasium when the floor started splitting open like a scene out of an earthquake movie. 3 of the people on the floor, including the principal and Timothy's mother, had fallen into the darkness before anyone realized that it was the motorized floor springing to life after decades, opening up its mouth to reveal the old pool below. Another 2 people got trampled as everyone started trying to get out, running down whatever was the closest hallway and pushing through the doors, triggering the fire alarms as they went. We were moving against the current, the 5 of us heading toward the gym together without having to say anything or make a plan. We knew what was going on, and we were determined to try and stop it. By the time we pushed our way into the gymnasium, the floor had stopped moving, leaving a rectangular void in the middle of the floor 20 feet wide and 50 feet long. I remember hearing the dying screams of a little boy that had been stomped to death on one of the lower bleachers. And I was turning to go help him when I heard you yell your sister's name. I didn't understand at first. We knew some of our parents were going to the vigil, but neither yours or mine were among them. As far as any of them knew, none of the 5 of us were going either. How would your little sister have wound up there? I went to ask you what you were talking about when I heard it. Alicia's voice calling for you from the dark beneath the gym. I would have said it was a trick, but I went to the edge where you were bent down peering into the shadows. I saw her looking up at us just like you did. She was terrified and soaked, but otherwise seemed unhurt. I started looking around for some way of getting down to her or pulling her up, but that's when the floor began to close. You tried to go in after her then. Me and Alice are what stopped you. Maybe that was selfish, but I didn't care then, and I would still do it now. I think you would have died down there, and I wasn't willing to lose you, even if it meant we lost your sister. We wrestled and held on to you long enough that the floor closed back up. And as soon as you were free, you just stared at us for a long moment before running off. We tried to catch you, but there were too many people outside. I remember us looking for you for some time around the school, but then nothing. I was waking up with all of you at the football field, and later I heard about your father dying in the gym that night too. I'm so sorry we didn't try telling you this again sooner. But you were strange after it happened. You had memory gaps that I was actually a bit jealous of, and I was afraid if you remembered more, it would either hurt you or cause you to hate me. So I talked everyone into letting it go, and life went on. Your mom took you away to live with your aunt, but we kept in touch and stayed close all these years. I wanted more with you. Still do. But I didn't feel right trying to start something with you with all these secrets between us. Just, please don't hate me. Any of us. We really did try to do the right thing. Especially you and Ellis. I looked at her a moment before leaning forward to hug her. I waved Thomas over and he joined in too. It was nearly 7 in the morning and we were all exhausted, but the last thing on my mind was being angry at the few friends I had left in the world. Mills looked relieved when we pulled apart, and I was about to suggest that we get some rest and then try contacting the professor when I heard a voice coming from Mills that I hadn't heard in a long time. This is all very sweet. I'm glad I could be part of bringing you all closer together again. But I think we're past reliving old memories for now. Time to make some new ones. The professor was holding Mill's lips in a nasty smile, her eyes rolling and terrified as it spoke. Let her go. Talk through me, damn it. That old screeching laugh. In due time. Don't worry. I'm not hurting her. I don't want to hurt you either. I just need you to come visit me. The time has come for a class reunion. Thought I knew the answer, but I wanted to be sure. Okay. Where do you want us to visit you? At the school? Mill's expression stretched into a grimace that was painful to watch, her eyes watering as the skin of her eyelids was being pulled so taut. Yes, the fucking school. His voice was rough and angry, and it waited a moment before going on in a softer, quieter tone. The place you left me. Left baby sis. Left so much in the underneath, in the cold, in the dark. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas lunge forward and snatch up the gun from the coffee table. For a moment I forgot it was unloaded, and I let out a scream as he put it to his temple and pulled the trigger repeatedly, each metallic click bringing a shuddering gasp of breath from him. By the fourth click, I saw that he had wet himself, and as I stood to help him, he lowered the gun. I saw the professor and Thomas's face a moment before I heard its voice coming from him, wavering between tinkling bells and grating stones. Don't make me wait. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed these parts of this ongoing story. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. You can also visit Verastahl.com to find out more information about my books, as well as get news and updates. Until next time.